Good afternoon, and thank you for joining. I'm Cynthia Appoint. I appreciate your time as I go through the Massachusetts Marijuana Social Equity Report. Now, this is a report that I put together to analyze Massachusetts equity programs through the lens of those harmed the most by the war on drugs and the victims of marijuana mass incarceration. The purpose of the program is to provide actionable recommendations that will disrupt the current course of action in Massachusetts, which is to perpetuate the status quo of white male ownership and dominance in this industry, the income and wealth gap along racial lines in Massachusetts, and the continuation of criminalizing and penalizing Black and brown people for their participation in this industry. Now, the way the report is set up, we have 10 observations that I provide, and for each observation, I provide a recommendation. Underneath that, I list evidence that support the observation or that led to the observation, and commentary that give you an insight and guidance into why it is this is the recommendation that we're putting forth to address that observation. We're going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to start off with observation number 1. The CCC and Massachusetts leaders make decisions that keep those most affected by the war on drugs out of the legal cannabis industry. And the recommendation is to appoint leadership who not only have a sensitivity towards mass incarceration victims and the harms done to Black and brown individuals, their families, and communities, but in leadership who can advocate for bold measures and changes that benefit Black and brown people, and that the leadership ultimately needs to reflect the body of participation that we desire in this industry. And for the first evidence that I bring up is the fact that we have Governor Baker, Attorney General Healy, and Treasurer Deb Goldberg, who appointed the 5 commissioners for the Cannabis Control Commission. Of those 5, 4 of them are women. None represent the victims of marijuana mass incarceration. And so we do not have at the leadership level the sensitivity and the keenness on the needs and interests of those who have been victims of the war on drugs and what that would look like for them to participate in the legal industry. What we do have are women who, as they are evaluating licenses, they are very attuned and sensitive to the presence and participation of women in business. And so you'll hear the pushback. While this particular licensure application needs to include more women, they need to demonstrate how their diversity plan is going to incorporate more women into their particular establishment. And very well so, that's important. I think Massachusetts will, in that way, is setting a trend for women participation in this cannabis industry that the rest of the country will be able to follow. However, women were not the victims of marijuana mass incarceration. Women were not the target of the war on drugs. And so the point here is that we need to make sure that we have leadership that is sensitive, just as sensitive, and can ensure that we are seeing participation and pushing the establishments that are coming forth seeking licensure, that we're pushing them to really focus in and hone in on how it is that we are engaging the victims of marijuana mass incarceration, those who have been criminalized and penalized and demonized for their participation in this industry. Black and brown people explicitly, specifically. The ACLU report that was released in April reiterated a well-known fact, a long documented history, but I think the point to drive home from this report, it reiterated the fact that Black and brown people are being arrested at rates 3 times that of their white peers. And the point to really drive home is that marijuana has been legal in Massachusetts since 2016. This report was just released in 2020, and it says that the arrest rates continue to increase. The disparity in the arrest between Black and brown marijuana users continues to increase, despite the fact that the amount of use, the way people engage, is similar regardless of demographics. And so it's important that we have leadership that at the foundation level, as we build this industry in Massachusetts, that we have leadership that can provide recommendations, provide actions, can provide insight into regulatory policies, and even into laws that we need to have in place or we need to have removed to ensure that we are maximizing and ensuring full and robust participation from all demographics, particularly those who have been historically targeted and criminalized for their participation in this industry. To further undergird this point for a need of appropriate leadership, the CCC put out a positive impact plan report analyzing the plans that various establishments were putting forth for their particular projects as to how they were going to positively impact the community. And in this report, they had the opportunity to ask the commissioners what their understanding of social equity was. And I'm going to take the moment to read. The report states, if placed on a continuum, key stakeholders, the commissioners, defined social equity as ranging from acknowledgement of past harm with a commitment to addressing harm, to equality of opportunity without attachment to equality of outcome. Different definitions may indicate a difference in approach to achieving the stated ends. So this lack of consensus amongst the key decision makers here in this industry undergirds the fact that we really need leadership that understands not only the history, because in this report it shared that the commissioners were aware of the history of prohibition, they were aware of the disproportionate impact that the war on drugs had on Black and brown people, but yet their understanding of what social equity, what marijuana social equity means, that level of consensus needs to be in place so that we can see decisions that align with that understanding. And as I go through the report and I discuss some of the other actions and decisions that have been made and how they have impacted negatively those who are supposed to benefit from the equity programs, it makes more sense when you understand from the start, the foundation, those who have been placed in these roles to make the key decisions to establish the cannabis industry in Massachusetts, they themselves lack the understanding as to how it is to fully address the war on drugs, to fully address the harms done by the war on drugs, the victims of mass incarceration, the victims of marijuana mass incarceration. And just so we're clear, throughout this discussion of the report, I go back and forth between using the phrase marijuana mass incarceration and mass incarceration. I'm speaking specifically about marijuana mass incarceration because it drives home the point that we are talking about a history that our country has had where the government and local enforcement targeted through disproportionate enforcement of the laws, through discriminatory enforcement of the laws, and through abusive use of the law to attack and terrorize Black and brown individuals and their communities, going back to the Nixon era when the war on drugs, when that campaign, the actual campaign with that name, the war on drugs, was launched, and the target was Black and brown communities. So it resulted in the disproportionate arrest rates. It resulted in the disproportionate conviction rates. It resulted in the racial profiling that we see and that we're still struggling and grappling with here in 2020 to understand. And so when I say mass incarceration, for the purposes of this report, I am talking about marijuana mass incarceration. And the last piece, when it comes to Observation 1, is going back to the ACLU report. Massachusetts, in that report, it talks about the fact that Massachusetts has been legal, marijuana has been legal here since 2016, but it also highlights the fact that we have we rank number one. We have the number one county here with the disproportionate arrest from between Black and white people for their participation, their use, their possession of the marijuana plant. And that's problematic because here it is that it's a legal plant and we're still suffering the same consequences. We're still enduring the war on drugs, and we have an equity program established and we're still dealing with this. So we need to really look at how this program is going to go about not only ending that, but also ameliorating the harms and the injustices and the long-term effects of that. We're going to take a break right here and transition to Observation 2 and Recommendation 2. Please join me for that video.